Hi everyone, I hope you had a good Easter weekend. Hope you were able to disconnect for a while and spend time with your family, and hope you got lots of chocolate. So, what we've been doing, we've been going through the things that I've outlined in the Space Invaders tutorial. And from the survey that I gave the other day, I could see that some of you were early in the tutorial, and there are some of you who are all the way up in the teens, and there was one person who's actually gone through the entire tutorial and made Space Invaders, which is very cool. But we are kind of going through and doing little assignments based on this stuff. So our first assignment was key control, which was based on part 2, and then we did some shooting, which was based on 3 and 4, and then the bouncing game that you have due today that's based on part 5, and so now we're going to talk a little bit about timers. So I just wanted to give you a quick lesson on timers because they can be a little confusing the first time you've seen one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to use a timer along with a counter. Now, in the world of programming, people make things all the time. They make, for example, if somebody wants to make an object that counts up, then they can give it to somebody else to use. And so right here, what I'm doing when I import a class is I'm basically importing something that someone's already made. Like someone's already made a counter, and I'm going to import that, and you'll see that now it becomes an actor that I can use in my world. And same thing with a timer. If I import a simple timer, I can use that as well. So what I want to do is I want to make it so that I have a counter that goes up. Let's say just counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And the way that works is it's the timer working with the counter. The timer controls what happens, and the counter displays what happens. But one can't really work without the other in terms of showing something to the user. I could have a timer running in the background without a counter, but if I want to have kind of like a clock type thing, then I have to have a timer working with a counter. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into my world, and here I'm going to say add object new counter, and we'll just put it right in the middle. And now you'll see a counter appears right here at 0. Okay. Now if I want the value to go up all the time, then what I do is I go into my world, and I'm going to make an act method. So this is a constructor, and that means that this happens once. It only happens the very first time the world is created. So when the world's created, it makes the screen, and then it adds a counter, and then it'll never do this again. But this, if I type public void act, this is called an act method, and whatever I put in here is going to happen again and again and again and again and again and again. So what I want to do here is I want to add stuff to the counter. Okay. Now at this point it becomes a little bit complicated because how do I add to a counter like when I don't know its name? What I mean by that is like I put a new counter on the screen here, but how do I say, hey, I want to add something to that new counter? I can't just go counter dot add because counter is the name of the class. Like I could have multiple counters. I guess the way you want to think of that, you use these classes over here like you do blueprints. If I wanted to make a house, I would use a blueprint to make a house, and then I could use it to make another house and another house and another house. But this is not the object that I want. This is just holds the instructions on how I can make the object. So what I need is I need to find a way to access the counter that I put on the screen. So what did I call the counter that I put on the screen? And the answer is I didn't. I just made a new counter and I put it on the screen without really giving it a name. So I'm going to alter the way I did that. I'm going to cut that. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to tell the computer that I'm going to make a new counter. I'm going to call it C just for fun. You can put whatever you want. So this line right here, now the difference is it makes a new counter, but it calls it C, and this is me telling the computer that C is a counter object. And I'm going to add C to the screen like that. And what you'll see now, I'll just take this out for a minute. It's still there, except now, instead of this counter having no name, now I know it's called C. And so now in the ACMED, if I go C dot and then I hit control space, these are all the different things I can do to a counter. One of them is add. And so if I say add 1 right there, there you go. It's working. And it's working because the act method runs this over and over and over and over and over again. Now, I haven't even used a timer yet, so you're thinking, well, maybe I don't need a timer. But the thing is, you need a timer to control how often this happens. Right now, it's just happening every single time the act method runs. So it happens over and over and over again. It's not really controlled. So if I want to control it, then what I do is the exact same way I made a counter. I'm going to copy paste, except this time I'm not making a counter. I'm making what's called a simple timer, and let's call it T. So on this line I make a counter and I call it C. On this line I make a timer and I call it T. Here I add the counter to the world, and here I add 1 to the counter's value. Now what I want to do is I want to use the timer to control how often I make this happen. So if you're thinking, well, let's add the timer to the world, let's add T to the world, what you'll find is that, wait, you can't do that. A timer is not an actor. That's why it's all the way down here. A timer is something that happens in the background. I can't add something that's invisible to the world, right? So what I do is I say, okay, well, when the world is created, I'm going to start the timer by doing that. That basically resets the timer to 0. And in the act method, I want to say if t dot control space, and here is milliseconds elapsed. So if the number of milliseconds elapsed gets to be greater than 1,000, that means a second has gone by, because there are 1,000 milliseconds in 1 second, right? So that value is in milliseconds. So I'll say it one more time. If the number of milliseconds that has gone by is over 1,000, that means we've hit the 1 second mark. And so then we want to add 1 to the timer. And then if that, well, let's run it and see what happens. So I'll reset, run. You see it doesn't happen right away, and then all of a sudden it starts going up like crazy. Now, why is it going up like crazy like that? Well, one thing we need to do is every time we add 1 to the counter, then we need to reset the timer. If we don't, the value of the timer is going to continually be over 1,000, and so this will happen over and over and over and over again. But if we do this, it sets it back to 0, and now I have to wait another 1,000 milliseconds before this happens. So if I run it now, you can see that now it's working. It's going up 1 every second. So that's how you make timers work with counters to do something on the screen like count. One common question I get in class when I do this, how do you make it go down? Well, if I want to make it go down, right after I add the counter to the world, then I could say C dot control space set value, and I could start it at, let's say, 300, like on a level of Mario. So if I do that, that's going to set the value to 300 right away, and if I put a -1 here, now it's going to count down. And so I could have a counter that starts at something really high like 300, and then here, if I wanted to, I could say, you know, add -1, and then if c.getValue is equal to, let's just say 295, so we don't have to wait too long, then something happens. We could go to a different world, so I'll just quickly make a new world just for this demo purpose with a background. It's black. And then in my code, I could say if the value of the counter gets to 295, greenfoot.setWorld new world. So basically what I'm saying here is let's make the counter go down by 1 every time. If the value of the counter gets to 295, we want to go to New World. So let's see if it works. There you go. All right. So timers and counters are very powerful. That's how you get counting to happen automatically based on something in the background. And you can set time limits or count how long it takes for the user to do something. So there you go. So after you've watched this video, go and check the content area and you'll have an assignment.